Hi, welcome to Have a Ball Week 9. Yeah, wow. Woo, exciting. We only have 3 more weeks. We have less than a month to the completion of your first novel. So, this is the week when all of your feedback has come in, and you may find, as I found when I spoke to you about this in week 6, when I asked you to get ready to get the first third of your manuscript to submit to readers, that depending on what they say, and we already talked about how to receive feedback and what happens when it comes back, you decide what, based on the criteria that I shared with you in week 7, what you want to what feedback you want to apply to the next revisions of your novel, and what feedback you're going to uh, be appreciative that you received, but you choose not to use. That is your choice. So you have made those decisions, and one of the things you may find is I found that it wasn't the language or the dialogue. In fact, those were the strengths of my novel in process. It was my plotting, and that that didn't while I had some measure of disappointment because I was having so much fun. I figured this thing has to be a perfect work of art. It hadn't really occurred to me that it might not be working in spots because I was having so much fun. And I think that's an important point. I wasn't stopping and ruminating about whether or not this is great or not. I was having so much fun. I was in that soup, and I really didn't have the objectivity. So when I learned from my first reader that I needed to fundamentally change how one of my characters was operating, because that was a significant thread throughout my novel. After my initial shock, because I was out of trance now, and my left brain was going, okay, which is exactly what needs to happen. You need to be in trance and have fun, because if you try to analyze this every step of the way, you will not get very far. It's why a lot of people stall, get completely blocked, and they just stop on their book because they're just overthinking it and they're not having fun. So to have your fun first, and then when people start giving you feedback, and then you can bring in your left brain and go, okay, all righty, that I can understand that, and begin to analyze it. So initially, I was overwhelmed with, oh my God, I have to change my whole book. No, and Sophia kept saying, no, you don't, you don't. She's trying to talk me off the ledge. And I realized, by giving myself that 48 hours, I actually gave myself 72 hours, and the boys in the basement started talking to me in response to Sophia's feedback. 24 hours later, I just took down their notes and I left it. But 72 hours later, conscious Gina, analytical left brain Gina, said, okay, yeah, I really don't have to like blow the whole thing up and start from scratch. This is one of the places where organizing your chapters, having your folders really comes in handy. Having the different uh, having the archives of the whole block of the book, and periodically saving them. If you've been doing that, you have maybe about, I don't know, 15, 20 different folders of your novel folders, but with different dates, that are basically snapshots of where you've been along this journey, along the funnel. So if, for example, using the concrete example of my book, this is the week where you've gotten all your feedback in, and you get feedback that is specific to your plot, because that's really what you've asked for. You've not asked for people to look at the language. And because you use the language every day, it's quite likely, if you're a native English speaker, or even if you are not native, but English is one of your many languages and you're proficient at it, chances are you haven't gotten a lot of feedback on your language, and you specifically didn't ask for that. You asked for plot, you asked for the bigger picture reading experience. I got feedback from Sophia, and I realized, okay, I knew then I didn't have to blow up the whole novel from scratch because I had basically taken snapshots of the entire novel. Basically, I just copied the whole folder, dated it for that date and put it in an archive. And I just kept doing that periodically. Is that I could go back to, oh, okay, so if I just take this out, but I didn't even really have to do that. It was just, I really understood that this character could not have sort of this behind the curtain puppeteer, puppet master power that I had given him. So all I had to do was say, well, what happens then? And then Sophia suggested that instead of him orchestrating all this, what happens if he, like these other characters, winds up being surprised at this information as opposed to knowing it for 30 years? What if he's surprised too? Then how does that change? And so because I had spent a fair amount of time in the upper chamber of the funnel, right? That wider part where you're playing with plot and just who are these characters in one of its world. I knew my world well enough, and this is why that foundational work is so important. I knew this world well enough so that after I got over the initial reaction and I gave myself the space to just sit with the feedback and not react to it, but then I could analytically respond to it. I realized, okay, so if I were just to remove that, and now Edgar is not pulling all the strings, these events have happened. And Sophia convinced me that, things do happen by coincidence. And I was challenged by the reason why I wanted Edgar to be such a puppet master is because I didn't want I didn't want to be a writer who says, well, this happens because it just happens. Yes, things like that. There are coincidences in life, and things do happen by happenstance. However, this is a crafted, deliberate work of intention, and so there, I can't just have things happening because people readers don't believe that, and you know that readers cannot suspend. Some readers and watchers of films have a hard time suspending disbelief, right? And they go, well, okay, I'm going to believe it to this point, but I don't believe it, that just doesn't happen. So that was really my tension. Is not that Sophia's feedback was invaluable. It wasn't that she didn't have, it wasn't credible. It was that I again, it gets back to this. It's not her job to solve the problem, the literary problem. It's mine. It's simply her job as a casual reader to go, this is how the reading experience, fell on my heart, mind, and spirit. So I was challenged with, well, if if this event happens, and this event, and I don't want to give it away, that really is sort of the basis for the conflict in the novel. What is the basis for that happening if somebody isn't orchestrating it? And Sophia kept saying, well, it just happens. Things just happen in life. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm a novelist and I need to have some control over this. So that was really my tension. My point, I want to give you a concrete example. My point is, I didn't have to blow up my whole book because I did that early work. Okay, I was going sentence by sentence, but I was doing it within the context of a framework, all right, of this world that I had created and knew very well. I then was able to just address that one piece and not feel like that the whole house of cards was going to tumble. I was able to address that one piece and could easily shift, not even relationships around it. Basically, as a result of that feedback, the plot changes. And by the way, I accepted that feedback, and it's made the book infinitely better. Infinitely, I don't want to say, again, that's a judgmental term, but I believe it's made it a more enjoyable reading experience. And I really just had to shift, I had to shift his character. Uh, it turns out that he's not as villainous as I originally thought. And it turns out not only is he not as villainous as I thought, he actually has a lot more compassion for his son, who's an adult in this book, than I thought. And so I actually, as much as I like Edgar, I like him even better now. And he seems more real to me now. He's not this, you know, sort of evil hellion puppet master. So, so by taking the time, yeah, you could probably write a novel in a weekend and not sleep or eat or whatever. The question I have is when it comes time to make it readable, then what? You went sentence by sentence, and then now what? They're a collection of sentences, in my view, unless you have that roadmap that we talked about. So, so basically, at this juncture, your feedback's coming in, and you wanna, as your pacer, you wanna be at the place now where you're letting whatever you were working on while your readers were reading bake time, like serious bake time. Those chapters really need to be clean, meaning we're done. We're done with hunk and plunk. That's over. Okay, that's been over for a couple of weeks. We really That's been over since week 6. We really need to have expository writing. Okay, linear sentences. Those chapters that are baking, let's call it 11 through 32, also will have had some first layer, well, they've always had some editing, but you might have started to listen and read out loud. So while those are baking, you're going back to the first third of your novel. You're incorporating feedback that's probably not solely germane to the first third. Even though Sophia gave me feedback of page 2, chapter 1, her feedback really had to do with the arc of the novel. So you can still play with that. You can play with that in your sandboxes. That's what I did. I literally moved up the funnel when I got the feedback, and I went into my sandbox folder and I created a new sandbox. And that is, what if Edgar doesn't know XYZ? What if Edgar is not orchestrating it? How do the dominoes now fall? And I played with that in the sandbox. So before I even started looking at individual chapters, I was like, well, how does this work in the broad sense? So I moved back up the funnel. Okay, and I started playing in the sandbox. I'm like, oh, okay. So, and that's actually calmed me down, right? Because I was getting anxious because I was out here going, oh, my whole book's going to change. And it short circuit that mess, and I went right to the work. I asked the work, and the work said, play with me in the sandbox. Play with me. Play with this whole idea that Sophia gave you in the sandbox. So if you're not sure, if you like the feedback, but if you accept the feedback, but you're not sure how to execute on it, go up the funnel, go into your sandbox, and start playing, start trancing, start brainstorming. So now you see how the funnel works. I've introduced these in layers, but you're moving up and down the funnel. Not up and down, up and down. Uh, you're moving sort of up and down the neck of the funnel. And when you get feedback and you might need to rethink your plot, then you move up the funnel, start playing in the sandbox. Things start to get clearer. And you can take that and move down the sandbox, start chunking and plunking this revised content based on the feedback you're getting. See, there's a method to the sister's madness. And so, yeah, so much fun. Finally, so then you work your process, you work your funnel. I promised you in week 8 that I was going to talk about reading aloud. Reading aloud, I'm surprised. This is like one of the first things I learned when I started studying writing. And this is when I started with geez, this was like in the late 1980s, and I read Natalie Goldberg's book. Ooh, I should do I have, yes, I have a copy. Ooh, I have a copy. Hold on a second. Writing Down the Bones. Natalie Goldberg was really, a lot of people have been talking about, they talk about free writing and write like you talk, and silencing the critic, the inner critic, and just writing from that fun space. And you have a lot of newer generation 21st century writers, writing teachers, creativity experts talking about this. But from my view, not but and Natalie Goldberg she's in her 60s now, and she started writing about this. As far as I'm concerned, this is for me, 20 years from now it might be another book, but for me, Writing Down the Bones, Natalie Goldberg, was the book that really just cracked my world. It cracked my life open, and I mean that in a good way. Another story for another time. The bottom line is that pretty sure it was Natalie from whom I learned. She's written several books on writing. That's really what she does. First and foremost, she's a writing teacher and a beautiful writer. I've also studied with Natalie twice, and one in New Mexico, where she lives. And I'm pretty sure it was Natalie. It might not have been. It might have been Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. I don't have that book in my. I have it, but it's just not handy right now. But it was either Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, another book that just blew my life open in a positive way. Writing Down the Bones, where Natalie talks about reading aloud and how writing falls on the ear as music. That was huge. I've heard this thing about read backwards. I tried that, and that is such cognitive dissonance. It actually gives me a headache. And I've had about 6 headaches in my entire life, and I've been on the planet for a long time. I cannot read backwards. I'm not even going to get into why people suggest it. I think it's a good suggestion because that means you can see errors more easily, because by not reading forward, you're not reading for meaning, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're doing a cognitive dissonance. I just find that it's so cognitively dissonant that it gives me a headache, and I need a cocktail afterwards. So reading aloud is so much more fun. I'm not saying reading backwards doesn't work. I'm saying it's not fun for me, and this is about having a ball. So reading aloud is like story time. You can read, you can read to yourself. Just read out loud to yourself. Or you could read the novel to somebody else. So reading aloud, huge. This is the time when you really want to slow yourself and read aloud. And that is really going to cut your editing time down, because you can read the same chapter over and over again, and it can sound beautiful in here. And the second you read it out loud, you're going to be 4 sentences in. You're going to go, geez, that's off. And you didn't see it before, because your left brain reads for meaning. You understand that your left brain is always about order and structure for meaning. It cares not one whit about beauty and poetry and fun. Okay, so if you keep it in here, it's all going to be about, does it make sense? And if it makes sense, you're going to keep going. Poetry, music, lyricism, rhythm, breaks, right? You're gonna hear things that you will never experience inside your head. And I think I got that from Natalie, but even if I didn't get that from Natalie, I got a life change from Natalie. And so in any event, this book is still worth talking about. And she still teaches, and you can Google her. She's got a website, but I will put the name of this book in the description. Okay, so basically, you're letting uh, the first third, you're letting the remaining 2/3 of your manuscript bake. That's what you were working on last week. All right, week 8, when your readers were still reading the first third of your novel. Now you're working on the first third of your novel. You may need to move up the funnel and play in the sandbox again. I don't know what you heard, okay? Um, but in any event, the title of this segment, week 9, is Bake Again. Yeah, again. Because bake time, that time away, is very powerful. Things like, the concept of not doing something, the concept of doing nothing as doing a whole bunch of something is, talk about cognitive dissonance, particularly in, I'm not going to speak for all of Western culture, but I will speak for the United States. People are like, what are you talking about? Get on board, people, because this is the thinking. This is how we're moving forward in the 21st century. It's about fun, it's about rest, it's about lying down, it's about distance, it's about being and not doing. So doing nothing is actually doing a whole bunch of something. Okay? Hey, we're done. I'll see you in week 10. Okay, bye.